I was ready to go, and then I
Hello,
lost it.
ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, my host, companion, and consummate professional, Sejohn Sarowik. Sejohn?
That's me.
How you doing, Sejohn?
I'm all over the place, Dev. It's a
We
big
are.
day.
We are all over the place. You know why we're all over the place? Because it's the 250th episode of the Say Report. Fwah, fwah, fwah.
Ding, 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 ding. Like I got a bell?
I got it.
Okay.
And this is why we lost our gig as morning drive time DJs. Because we just couldn't get a soundboard to work. And we're like, we can do our own sounds like Michael Winslow. And they're like, well, now you've said Michael Winslow and you're being sued by Michael Winslow.
Yeah.
And that's...
This is also why we're not Muppets. We tried. They did not want us.
I mean, I'm a little offended by that. We show up at the Muppet Theater. Kermit's there. He's freaking out about the show. Scooter signs us in as an audition. He must know that we're human beings, right? Clearly, neither of us are marionette puppets.
I'm pretty sure that they don't even care about that anymore. I'm pretty sure that rule went out the window with Jason Segel, right?
Well, I mean, Jason Segel did eventually become a marionette puppet. I don't call them Muppets anymore. I use the proper term.
It's also not the proper term, but that's okay.
Isn't that why they're called Muppets? Because they're marionette
No.
puppets?
No,
I'm pretty
not
sure
at
that's
all.
why they're called Muppets. I'm like, I don't want to stop this episode and the energy that we already have flipping around the room to look it up. But I'm pretty sure. But you know what? I'm going to be delivering a theory later on, and you can look up what Muppet means. Because it's a portmanteau of marionette and puppet. I'm like 100% sure that's what it stands for.
Marionettes are already puppets, though.
I know, which, like, Jim Henson sold us all a lie, and we bought it. We just ate it up.
I mean, I never heard this before, so let's not act like you did that to everybody.
If it's true, if what I just said is true. But hi, welcome to the Say Report, 250 episodes of the Say Report. And you know what, Sejohn? You know what the Say Report is missing 250 episodes in?
I'm sorry, I'm deep in the paint on this one, man. I've got to figure this out. No, what is going on?
What we are missing 250
what we're
episodes
missing.
in, we don't have a rival, right? All of the best things have rivals. The Red Sox have the Yankees. The Dallas Cowboys have the entire rest of the NFL. The Yankees have, the rest of the MLB, right? Like, it's rivalries of things, right? Ash has Gary. I can't think of any other rivalries right now. But rivalries, the Lakers and the Celtics, right? Why don't I look at, like, local sports teams? That's the thing to do. The Bruins and the Maple Leafs. These are things. These, like, rivals are these big deals. So it's the 250th episode, and not to tread familiar territory as we did with our 150th episode, I did still look up other shows that have made it to that glorious 250 mark, right? And we've looked at some, and, like, we blew Seinfeld away, even with our 200th episode, because they only had 197. But there was one show that I was pretty certain had more episodes than the Say Report. And in my research today, just to set it off, I come to find out that Last Week Tonight with John Oliver only has 237 episodes. And that show's been going for 8 years. We're in our fifth... Yeah, it's been going for 8 years. Because I saw a taping of it 6 years ago.
That's wild to me.
But yeah, so they're in their 8th season, we're in our 5th season, and Johnny Boy, we blew you out of the water, right? We're 13 episodes ahead with no signs of stopping anytime soon. So, like, I figured we could talk some smack on John Oliver and start a rivalry, right? Because, like, he needs a whole group of people to do his show. He has writers. It's just the two of us schmucks in our basements talking into microphones doing the Say Report. He does half-hour episodes. We do regularly an hour.
I think not to burst your bubble too hard here, but I think that if you start so much shit with a town that they literally name a sewage factory after you, you've got a rival already.
Right, exactly. And I wanted some of that sweet, sweet rivalry, right? If we target John Oliver,
I'm
right?
just saying, I don't think he needs us.
Right. Well, he doesn't need us. He's starting shit with everybody. He's like the Larry David of comedy news shows, right? All the other late night talk shows hate him because he wins all the Emmys and he only does it one day a week, right? What I'm saying is, I think there's enough hate to go around for us to get our filthy little fingers covered in some of that nacho cheese hate sauce of the John Oliver variety.
So your hope with episode 250 is to go negative. This is
No.
This is the turn.
No. Listen to my tone. I'm trying to go negative, but with a positive tone. Really, what I'm saying is, if you are out there, I mean, John Oliver, he's got his finger on the pulse, right? So all we have to do is convince him that we have enough of an EKG that he should, like, call us out and be like, fuck you, the Psy Report. Or however he talks, right? So if you are listening to this episode of
Devon.
You know what? It stinks of desperation if he has 251 episodes and we have 250 episodes. But when we are 13 episodes ahead of that smarmy British bastard, this is what we got to do, right? This is what we got to do. So if you're listening, if you're a listener, if you love the Say Report, at John Oliver, I don't know, I should have come up with a hashtag, right?
Yeah, see, okay.
Hashtag Say Report says so. That's it. Say Report says so. Nope, you're part of it. You've co-signed. Hashtag Say Report says so. Just that to at John Oliver and at Last Week Tonight. And let's see if we can make some happen, right? Let's see if we can make some happen. Because the truth is, Siege's not wrong, right? This is going negative. This whole bit that I'm doing to kick off the 250th episode, it's a joke about going negative, and that's not what we are here, right? This is at the core, the Say Report. We say it's a show about everything, but that everything extends to finding a positive outlook on the entire world, right? That's pretty much our philosophy, is finding the positivity in every situation, right? That's what the Say Report is. And I don't know, I think I was sad, right? Because it was one of those moments where, like, in a weird way, I aspire to be John Oliver. Not like in every way, but just I dig the way that he just does whatever he wants to do, right? On his Last Week Tonight. It's such a broad topic, because last week happened, and so much happens in a week. Right, Sejohn? Am I crazy for thinking that?
Dude, right now I am one of the unnamed assholes in the car with Tyler and the narrator in Fight Club, so I have no fucking clue why we're driving off the road, but I'm going with you.
Anyway, the fact is that, like, I was a little surprised to see that he's been going for 8 years and won untold Emmys. We are not in the same league as John Oliver at all, right? But it would be funny if we got all the people who listen to this very episode to tweet at him, hashtag Say Report Says So. That's it. It's a bit. Let's see what happens, right? I'm not asking to get us big up on Twitter, right? I don't want us to be a trending hashtag. I don't know, I'm bored. I want to celebrate 250 episodes. And targeting John Oliver for what is essentially the Alice's Restaurant Massacre movement, right? You walking up to John Oliver's Twitter, you're singing a bar of Alice's Restaurant, and you're walking out, right? That's all I want you to do.
Okay. Oh, man. Tell him I say hi.
Hashtag Say Report Says So. I don't know. This is something that got into my head, and I figured if I didn't get it out, it would just cast a pallor over my entire, like, attitude with this 250th episode, because it's 250 episodes of the Say Report. I never thought we'd get here. Honestly. You know what I did last night? It was Halloween, right? So we're going to talk about Halloween and what we did for Halloween, I imagine, right? Halloween's kind of a big deal at the Say Report, especially on Sejohn's side of the border. I'm kind of over it, but, there's reasons why I'm over it. COVID really, really took away any excitement I had towards Halloween, come to find out.
I mean, I don't know. So things were really weird for Halloween this year over at this house because I don't know if y'all noticed, but Halloween was on a Sunday this year, and I don't know
What's
how
that
often
like
we've
in
talked.
Mormon country?
Yeah, they don't do it. They decide to they move trick or treating, and every neighborhood gets to basically pick what day is going to be their trick or treating day, which is a friggin' mess because if a kid wants to go anywhere outside of their neighborhood to trick or treat, they don't know if they're actually supposed to. So then people just don't go trick or treating, and so it amounts to three kids showing up at your door and a bag of candy that you have to now eat for the rest of the season.
Oh, what a terrible burden you have upon you. I have to eat the ungifted Halloween candy.
Yeah, so between it being on a Sunday, and you're not wrong, the COVID stuff is kind of taking the wind out of a lot of people's sails. You know, getting your kid, the one person in your house that can't get the vaccine, to walk up to a stranger's house and ask for something to be handed to them that they then put in their mouth immediately is probably not the ideal situation right now.
Right. I mean, it's also the fact that, like, we thought we were done with this a year ago, right? Like, a
Yeah.
year ago, there were talks about, like, yeah, it's going to be okay to go out for Halloween. We kind of have this under control. Our numbers are going down. And, like, so it's even weirder that this is our second Halloween with the coronavirus, COVID-19, still like
Or
a
as we
major news
affectionately call
thing.
it here, Coco.
Like the gorilla, the sign language gorilla.
Oh, now I'm sad. Miss you, Coco. But yeah, no, it's 2 years in a row now, and you know, I mean, the thing is like some of the stuff that I saw this year, I just don't know if that ever changes. Like even once kids are able to get vaccinated, and this disease is finally gone from this society, God knows what that actually looks
I don't
like.
know if
But like,
gone is even going to be the thing. I think
or,
controlled, right?
yeah,
Like
I mean,
we,
at least until we can get enough people vaccinated, like with smallpox and stuff like that. But even that still exists in places in the world, right?
yeah.
So like you're not wrong, man. But like that idea being that that there's still some habits that we've kind of gotten into that or gotten away from in some cases that I don't think come back, you know?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. But, right, and the reason why I bring it up on the 250th is the way that I celebrated Halloween last night is I rewatched a Halloween special that the first time I watched it, I was convinced this is going to be the only time that I ever watch this Halloween special. I'm never going to watch it again. And it was for the second episode of Friends on a Couch, Two Friends on a Couch, Two Friends on a Couch, that was the name of the show. And someone on Facebook had written a long post about how Curious George, a Halloween boo fest, was not appropriate for a 5-year-old. It was too scary for a 5-year-old.
Hmm.
And that here's the thing about Devon Decker, right? It is not new. Sometimes things get under my skin and I just have to deal with them. And the post about the curious monkey and his friend in the yellow hat doing a Halloween special that's too scary for a 5-year-old. Like, Sejohn, we grew up in a world that had Halloween specials that were too scary for a 5-year-old. We
I mean,
existed with Garfield and Friends.
yeah. There's literally spawned nightmares for people, but yeah, yeah.
Right? So when I see that and I'm like, I need to watch it now. What I need to do, I have this new podcast, right? Second episode. We had a great topic for the first one. Gotta follow that up with some heat and some thunder. So like we'll watch Halloween Boo Fest and then we'll talk about and assess, is this too scary for a 5-year-old? Or is it maybe like an overprotective mom? Right?
Right.
And watch it and come to find out that it's really not like I mean granted everybody is different, right? There's that thing. Maybe it was too scary for her 5-year-old, maybe it was a case of an overprotective mom, but we watched the show separately, we didn't watch it together, and we both kind of came to the conclusion that really the messaging of Curious George, a Halloween Boo Fest, outside of the like overarching messaging of Curious George, where like if you're like curious about something, you can go out and you can find answers, right? You can learn more about the things that you don't have the answers for, which like that's what that show is. It's on PBS. It's public broadcasting television.
Right.
So, like, the whole point of it, it's sort of like Blue's Clues in that George gets curious about something and then he tries to figure out why that something happens. And what happens in the Boo Fest is there's an old myth and legend that goes around wherever they move to about No Noggin, which is a scarecrow that kicks off people's hats when they walk by Old Lonesome Tree on Halloween night.
Just kicks their hats off.
Just kicks their hats off. Doesn't do anything else, right? It just kicks the hats off. But No Noggin hasn't been there, but still on Halloween night, the spirit of the No Noggin scarecrow comes back and steals your hats. And George, right? Like, he's like, well, why? Why doesn't the scarecrow have a head? Why is it kicking off hats? These are questions that a little monkey needs to have the answers to, right? So it's this really interesting thing when you place it around something like Halloween, because one of the nature things of Halloween is we know that, okay, well, so I don't want to offend anybody when I say this, right? But from a science,
I was wondering what we were tiptoeing around here, but here we go.
No. We're not even at the reason why this became like, oh, maybe it's too scary for a 5-year-old, and in retrospect, right? But like scientifically, right? We have scientific proof that like things like ghosts and werewolves and vampires, like if they exist, is a very low probability, or it's in very low numbers, right? I mean, I love the idea. What?
Wait, say that sentence again, and say that in a way that does not make me want to reach through the screen and choke you. What? Did you just say that we have a low probability of those things existing?
No. I say that if they exist in low numbers. Their population probably isn't super high.
That's a weird
way to say it. But
that's a weird if-then statement for that.
I mean, it is definitely a weird if-then statement. I mean, it's basically the same. It's still plausible that those things exist, but based on the evidence that we have, or to make Sejohn excited, the messaging that we've been fed by our government, those things do not exist, right?
This is not even on a...
What, Sejohn? What?
These things do not exist, blanket. That is the statement.
Okay.
We know that these things do not exist.
All right, we know that these things do not exist. However, on Halloween, right, on the 31st of October, it's fun to pretend that they do, right? Well, I don't want some freaking, like, we do a lot of vampire episodes, so I don't want to alienate what might be our large vampire fan base, who are going to, be tweeting at John Oliver, hashtag say report says so, hashtag thanks for the memories. Like,
oh no. Oh man.
But
I just
want to make sure, but they don't exist. But on Halloween, we all kind of pretend that they do, right? It's part of the fun, it's part of the excitement of a day like Halloween. So George sets off to solve the mystery of No Noggin, and in so doing, realizes that he finds an old picture, and No Noggin was located nowhere near Old Lonesome Tree or by the creek. So it's just a story. And then when people find out that it's just a story in the town that they live in, they all get kind of bummed out, right? Like, logic takes away the fun of Halloween for them. And then George is like, well, that sucks. Like, look what I did. Look what my curiosity has wrought. Right? And then as it goes on.
Yeah, I mean, it's the dangers of being a know-it-all episode. That is a common episode in a lot of shows of just right. You can be kind of an asshole just because you're I was just curious, and you're also ruining the fun for everybody.
Yeah, right. Like, this is not something to be curious about. But also, he's supposed to be like a child. Like, he hangs out with other children in town. The Curious George PBS show is bananas.
Just for the record, kids can be shitty too.
Yes, true. I understand. But I mean, the show is just like, it's crazy that like the man in the yellow hat will hand George a $10 bill and be like, why don't you go to town and buy a couple of pumpkins for Halloween? And it's like, that's a wild animal that you just suck on the population of this sleepy country town. Man in the yellow hat.
Buy me a coffee on the way back.
Yeah, it's one of those things. But then as it progresses, George finds out the truth about No Noggin, which, spoilers for Curious George, a Halloween Boo Fest. A squirrel that lived in the tree next to the No Noggin scarecrow found that hats were a good place to store acorns so that they wouldn't get dirt on them because he hated the taste of dirt. So on Halloween night, when people would walk by, and on Halloween night, a lot of people in this town, they wear big hats, like cowboy hats and wizard hats and all sorts of stuff. He would jump from the tree, steal their hats, and then use them to hold on to his acorns for the winter.
Now, am I misremembering? I've maybe seen an episode or two of Curious George in my life. I've sat in a waiting room or two with PBS Kids on, right? The animals don't talk in Curious George,
no, the
right?
animals do not talk. It's actually
So you're getting a lot of backstory here. They're conveying some very serious backstory.
Here's what happens, right? Is that they use Bill, who's like an older kid in town, as bait because he's dressed up like a wizard, and they have him pace back and forth by what actually is the tree where No Noggin Scarecrow was.
Yes.
And they're going to take pictures, and they take a picture as his hat is taken off, but then they see the hat in the background moving, and they chase it down until they get to the squirrel's like fortress, which is a cave.
Solitude. Yeah, okay.
And in the cave, there's like 100 hats, and they're all full of acorns. And when they go to take back Bill's hat, Jumpy, which is the name of the squirrel that lives in George's yard, stops them, and then he tells them the story of how, but he tells them all in like squirrel language, which George apparently understands, and Allie, George's like 6-year-old human female friend, also understands.
Oh my god.
And then it's all done in like imagery with a narrator telling them what's happening. And then George is like, oh, well, now I know the truth about No Noggin. And Allie's all excited, like, oh, we're going to tell the town and we're going to be famous. It's going to be the best. But George is like, but maybe we shouldn't tell them because of how sad they were the first time they thought that No Noggin doesn't exist anymore. Like, so it's this like weird balance of it. But then the other part of it, right? I went down the wrong path with the Curious George Halloween Boo Fest. I apologize. Because the most important fun thing of it is that the messaging is that on Halloween, we scare each other, right? By like saying boo or playing tricks on people. But then when we realize that we're actually safe, that our lives are not in jeopardy, we get to have a good laugh about it, right? Like it's just the way that we're celebrating. It's just the inherent way that you celebrate Halloween. So to like deny your 5-year-old from watching this show, like seems weird, right?
Like you missed the point of the episode?
Yeah. Like, no, like your kid's now going to be afraid of everything because they're never going to learn that like it's okay to be scared because then we can laugh about how we were scared. We thought that tree branch was creepy skeleton fingers. No, it was a tree branch, right?
Oh my god. Yeah, so I don't know, man. It's a really dangerous method to tell kids like sometimes it's okay to let parents believe stories, believe lies.
I know,
like is a
right?
weird.
And there's like the weirdest thing, but I can't imagine that if your 5-year-old is creeped out, because the creepiest moment in it is the first telling of the No Noggin story. Like it's darker colors that are being used. It's spooky lighting. The kicking of the hat is like kind of disturbing because like the leg from the scarecrow stretches absurdly long. And then just like the ankle kicks the hat off.
Yeah, man. You start talking about it enough, you're gonna scare yourself.
I'm not gonna scare myself. I've seen it 3 times now. I'm okay. But
I'm a big brave boy.
I'm brave. I'm a Curious George fan. No, it's one of those situations where that's just what you do. But it was on PBS and it just was randomly on. And the scene was George saying, "Why would a scarecrow not have a head? And why kick hats?" And my mother and sister were like, "Oh, I want to know." And I'm like, well, like, we're halfway into the episode. We're watching it from the beginning. So we watched for Halloween. The only Halloween themed entertainment we watched was Curious George, a Halloween Boo Fest. And halfway through it, my mother's like, "Are they in Maine?" Because it's a lot of Maine accents. So she
Yeah.
looked up the authors of Curious George, the I can't think of the Haleys, right? Hart and M.A. Shelley or Shaley. It's one of those things. But then she also found that there's a co-author who was responsible for bringing Curious George to public television and also for taking over the responsibility of writing episodes in the 90s. And his name is Alan Shalleck. And the story of Alan Shalleck might be the reason why this show is no longer appropriate for a 5-year-old. Because Alan Shalleck, he had a bit of a kink, and there's no kink shaming here at the Stay Report, right? Do whatever makes you happy as long as it's safe and not illegal. So he would regularly put out ads to find like orgies and multiple partners to engage in sexual congress with. And he was 76 years old. He placed one of these ads, and the two people who responded to the ad figured that he's an old man, so he'll probably have money, and it'll be easy to steal that money from him. So they roll up at his house, where he has said, "Come on down for the orgy," right? Join Alan Shalleck for an orgy. I'm pretty curious, too. And they stabbed him 37 times and almost severed the genitals from his body.
Jesus.
He died.
Why are we...
Because this then became the Halloween horror story. And it was inspired because we watched a pretty wholesome Curious George Halloween special. And then the like around the campfire urban legend that is true, confirmed by multiple sources. That's how Alan Shalleck died. That sort of became our whisper quiet by candlelight spooky ghost story. So
I don't. Yeah, you guys celebrate Halloween a lot different than I do.
We eat beef stew out of a pumpkin. We watch what's supposed to be wholesome entertainment, and then we find the dark side of it.
I watched Hocus Pocus and handed out candy to 3 kids.
That's fun. What were the 3 kids dressed as? Can you share that, or will it?
I like witch and one was a computer, I think. Yeah, there was nobody. There was not a lot of character work this year. I don't know if it was a lot of you kids have been home for so long, make your own costumes this year type of thing, or what. But
or yeah. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like if you're going out for Halloween, you have to make your own costume. Yeah, I'll let you go out if you make your costume.
Yeah.
But also, witches and computers, that seems like the scariest things to Utah, right? Without.
Oh, man. No, they're not big on the witchcraft stuff out here. I mean, like, considering having just watched Hocus Pocus and Salem and all that, right? There's not a lot of that sort of stuff out here. Like, there is a love of Halloween. I've talked about that before. Like, and I think it comes from like a repression, like a repressed place. But there's this, but there's nothing to. There, I think because of that, there's like you have to get pretty taboo for them to get really upset about anything out here in terms of like that sort of stuff. Like you can talk about like witches and wizards and things like that, and they don't get too caught up. It's when they start like talking about that sort of stuff in schools. That's when you're more likely to hear about it. It's like okay, save that for home. If your kid wants to read Harry Potter in his own time,
Harry Potter's for the weekend. Harry Potter's for the weekend.
Right, exactly. Oh man. So that was our big like Halloween, and again that was like Saturday night. That wasn't even yesterday because yesterday was just like honestly it was nap day for me. We had a friend in from out of town, and I just crashed for like the whole day. I don't know if anyone listened to our very special episode last week, but I'm recovering from what I talked about in that. And so like between like having a house guest for the first time in a long time, getting over an illness, and Halloween all kind of happening at the exact same time. Halloween day for Sejohn was like sleepy day. Like I had like my own Halloween special in my own little like nightmare realm with all the medicine that was in me.
Jesus. Well, that's good. I'm glad that you're recovering. Since you mentioned our very special episode, if you missed it, we did Ghostbusters Answer the Call. And as I'm being all reminiscent and retrospective regarding my podcasting times on this 250th episode, I was part of a show called Your Favorite Podcast, which was a YouTube exclusive podcast. And it's either the 5th or 6th episode where we just did a big episode about Answer the Call because it had just come out and we were like a new podcast and that was just the topic of the week. So like go search that out. That's a fun one. I'm actually on camera if you're curious what I look like. And I think I was stupid because I didn't realize we did green screen for that show and I wore a green Ghostbusters t-shirt.
Nice.
So it's just the logo floating.
It's the best type of Devon you could possibly ask for. Devon.
Green screen Devon, right?
Just
coming soon to Funko Pops.
Yeah, that'll be the special edition.
Yeah. Right at Emerald City Comic-Con, you can get green screen Devon Funko Pop figures.
No, exclusively at Walgreens. Here you go.
No, the Walgreens one is going to be me in my going to Walgreens looking for exclusives outfit.
So dirty sweatpants and a t-shirt.
Dickies. It's got to say Dickies on it.
Oh, man. Shit. I see, here I was thinking we were going to talk about Dune and N64 this week, and you started going on all sorts of places I wasn't ready for.
Oh, well, before we get to Dune and N64, there's one last thing that I want to make sure I get into the like head of this episode, the first act of our 250th episode, and that is my theory about young Sheldon. I want to get it on digital tape.
It is time. It is time for us to finally break the seal on something on this show. No, like in a lot of weird ways, we've kind of been very hesitant to ever talk about things like Big Bang Theory or Young Sheldon. Not that we haven't mentioned them when it was like clearly zeitgeist important. Like we didn't just ignore it, but like we've never done a deep dive into either of those properties.
Right. And since Young Sheldon is just now starting its 5th season, and it doesn't have 250 episodes, Big Bang does have 250, so it's sort of relevant, right? I found a lot of very, very thin threads or strings to tie everything together. I have a whole string theory for this episode. But what it is I've been watching Young Sheldon since it was new. And let me tell you, right, if you listen to our Answer the Call episode where Sejohn rightfully said, you grew up with a lot of positive female role models, not just in your home, but on your television, you know that I'm a fan of designing women, right? So what brought me to Young Sheldon was not at all seeing Sheldon as a boy in Texas, but the fact that Annie Potts plays his grandmother.
Right.
Because I got to be there for Annie Potts. That's just the rule of Devon Decker. It's not like... If there were commandments of Devon, it would probably be like 11 or 12, right? Like it's not on the stone stuff, but then if the addendum has that one featured there.
You know, there is like a famous piece of work. Never mind, it's fine.
What are you talking about?
I was going to say like the Bill of Rights, and then you get like amendments, and it's fine.
Yeah, but they're not rights. These are commandments. These are tenets with which I live my life by.
Fair enough. No.
So I watched it for Annie Potts, and I've been watching now, and it's been very different, right? For much of the Big Bang Theory, the picture that Sheldon paints of his home life in Texas, and specifically of his father, are despicable. Like, completely gross. Like, he escaped from what was a cesspool except for his mother. Like, his mother was really the only positive influence. And then later on, they start talking about his grandmother. But he calls his father a womanizer who never really understood him and sort of hated him because of that lack of understanding. But if you watch Young Sheldon, that's simply not the case.
Well, I feel like, okay, so here's my time to come clean. Not really ever watched either show. Now, to say that I didn't watch Big Bang Theory would be disingenuous. I have definitely seen an episode or two. It was on for so long. How could you miss it? Right. But like, I never in any like what's the right way. Like I never binged it. I never got invested, right, in Big Bang Theory. When Young Sheldon came around, it felt like that was kind of an inevitability. Not necessarily Young Sheldon itself, but a spin-off from Big Bang Theory seemed like they had to. It was one of those things where like somebody in office somewhere was like, I don't care what we do, but we got to make this happen. And so Young Sheldon's what came out, right? And I feel like I have gotten the impression over the years that time and time again, Young Sheldon has, in a weird way, almost purposely distanced itself from the Big Bang Theory, and that there's like now straight up like contradicting like moments and facts, right?
Right.
Okay.
You're not wrong. There are definite contradictions that exist all over the place, right? And that is where this theory comes from. And this theory is partially inspired by yet another conversation about How I Met Your Mother and Ted being an unreliable narrator, specifically in his portrayal of Barney Stinson.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in an episode I believe it was the last episode of the 3rd season, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. If I have some big Young Sheldon heads here, let me know that I'm wrong. Let me know when it happened.
Sheldon heads.
Amy Farrah Fowler, played by Mayim Bialik, she spoke because the whole show is narrated by Sheldon Cooper that we know. The Sheldon Cooper that's played by guy whose name I can't, Jim Parsons.
Jim Parsons, yeah.
Yeah, also of the Muppets, right?
Yes, also of the Muppets, yes.
Yeah, so in that episode, he says something and she responds. And that was the first one that kind of got my wheels turning. But now, as we are actually getting to his father sort of cheating on his mother, like that seems like that's what's going to happen in the 5th season. He was thrown out of the house, the father. He met up with the next door neighbor, and both of them wanted to go back home, but didn't go back home. But then the repercussions of that act are a lot higher than just the thought of promiscuity and infidelity. It got me finally to say, so what this is Young Sheldon is Sheldon telling his children about his childhood. It is Sheldon Cooper telling his kids, because that's the one where Amy Farrah Fowler spoke back. He said, and I wouldn't really know that feeling until I had children of my own, right? And then she responds, we had children of our own. And like, whatever, stupid little line, whatever. But I think that's it. I think that it is very much the story of how I got to wherever they go, Caltech.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I don't know. I guess like that seemed very obvious.
Yeah, it does. It seems obvious, but like I wanted to actually say it because for a long time I felt like it might be therapy. Like it might be Sheldon Cooper talking to a therapist about his childhood.
But very specifically, you think it's about him talking to family members.
I think he is very much telling his kids the story of when he was a kid.
Okay. Yeah, because if he was talking to a therapist, there'd be a lot more, well, at least there'd be a lot more implied honesty about some things. Whereas if he's telling things to his kids, like with the same thing that we deal with on How I Met Your Mother, the ways in which that story then gets changed in order to protect them in some way from something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, like, it'll be, I often, like, I don't necessarily always need that. Like I don't need to know who the narrator is speaking to. I'm perfectly happy with it being, the audience. Like, so when on How I Met Your Mother, they felt the need to frame it in such a way, it seemed kind of unnecessary. And in a lot of ways, I think in the end, tied their hands in really bizarre ways.
Oh, it definitely tied their hands. We know that
right?
because we saw the kids when they were young. So we filmed the final scene of this show because we didn't want them to age up. Completely missing the point, Carter and Bays, that if the kids went from like teenagers to 25-year-olds, it would add like a whole level of humor that like it feels like you've been telling the story forever.
Yeah, I mean, they even make those jokes sometimes. I mean, no, like, so So I think if there's a reveal at some point of who he is telling this story to, that in of itself is going to be kind of an unnecessary twist for me. And then if it ends up being his kids, that just seems like probably the obvious answer. As you said though, it could be something like a therapist, or I mean, like, I don't know, they could go full on like Beautiful Mind this and have him being like giving an acceptance speech for like a Nobel Prize, and like the joke being that he stood up there and told his whole life story, like would be honestly the funniest bit they could do the entire time.
Right, exactly.
Um,
Especially since it ended with him winning a Nobel Prize. Like, that
right.
was the end of the Big Bang Theory. That's not bad either. But for a long time, I thought that maybe he was talking to a therapist, and then through that discussion with the therapist, he was realizing that the way that he compartmentalized his childhood wasn't how it happened.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it was just the narrative that he had written for himself in order to be able to leave home at such a young age and all this other stuff.
I mean, it kind of goes back to a conversation, and this might have been on this very special episode, so I apologize for referencing it because I know that's not everybody listens to those. But that idea of it becomes a really hard conversation between, the joke versus the lore, like what's more important, right? And so a lot of the times in Big Bang Theory, it was always worth throwing in the joke about Sheldon hating his dad in order for the punchline and to move the plot along. But it was easy to just say a couple of things about how terrible his dad is and move on, not realizing that that's building up a very specific lore. So now you come to this young Sheldon stuff, and you have to focus on that side of it a lot more. And sometimes it's better for the lore for a certain thing to happen, even though it's not as funny. But that's okay, because like sometimes, yeah, it's a very weird like place to find yourself in as like a film, as like a television like sitcom maker specifically, because like your goal on every Thursday night is very different than say, Denis Villeneuve when he's out there making Dune Part Two, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that I think anyone is a better form of writing than the other either. It's just that your aims are different.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, having to write week to week as opposed to a single contained story is different. It is different. You're not wrong. But one of the only reasons why I think that there's probably something more going on is because it's Chuck Lorre. If it weren't a Chuck Lorre
Yeah.
show, like we've seen how Two and a Half Men ended, that crazy meta episode that would make Mark Zuckerberg blush. Uh, I gave a knowing glance to the camera. There's no camera. Uh, like
I mean,
I,
except for the one that he put in your house, but yeah.
right, exactly. It feels as if there's going to be some payoff at the end. And
Yeah.
for a while, I was convinced about the therapist of it all, and the therapist making him realize your life was not as tragic as you've always, designed it to be when you tell people.
Yeah.
But now I'm like 100% on the he is telling his children about his childhood train.
Yeah. For sure, and I mean, the second that they made it this particular character as the narrator, you're immediately given some impression that you should not necessarily rely on stories he's told before or will tell, right?
Right.
Because Sheldon is not the most reliable character in general.
I mean, for a long time, I thought it was just an alternate timeline.
Yeah,
And, like, we're getting to see, like, once it grew that way.
yeah,
But, I mean, one of the other reasons why I want to bring up young Sheldon is we talked about Bo Burnham inside for Boomers last episode,
yeah,
Curb Your
yeah.
Enthusiasm, which now has 2 episodes. And, first of all, I now know how Netflix got Seinfeld. It was because Larry David was like, I'd really like to frame the next season of Curb Your Enthusiasm about my character developing a series for Netflix.
Awesome.
And they're like, well, we want Seinfeld. And he's like, yeah, it's fine. I don't give a shit.
Sure, yeah.
Um,
I pass that thing around like it's fucking
yeah,
a
exactly.
$2 bill
Whenever,
anyway. Who gives a-
whenever it's convenient to me, I will change who has the rights to that. And right now it's convenient to me for this. But then it also shows just how on the finger like Larry David is, right? As he always has been, right? So from the Seinfeld days, in that the show that he is developing with Netflix is called Young Larry. And it is the story of a young Larry David.
Fuck me, Jesus, I love him so much. I mean, like, he's just the ways in which he's able to capture the nonsense that I'm still kind of like tuned into is amazing.
Yeah. And so far,
Uh,
this season has been very, very good. I'm happy that he didn't just lean into the pandemic of it all and that it's really a narrative. But the tie-in joke about COVID hoarders and then finding out that Albert Brooks was one,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was inspired. And I'm just excited to get to spend half an hour with Larry David every week, even if it's a fictionalized version of him. But I mean, is it? Is it?
Excellent, man. Excellent.
Yes. So you have topics that you want to talk about, and they're very interesting topics. Things that totally work for our 250th episode.
Yeah,
So,
especially because we made a promise last week, and I'm here to actually fulfill it, which is like, I think, a big monumental occasion, and I think should be celebrated for the 250th episode.
yes.
250 episodes. We finally said one thing one week we were going to do, and here we are the next week going to do it.
Well, look at us.
Yeah, finally getting it right.
And what's that? And so that's Dune. Is it that we're going to talk about Dune? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just
you brought it up, and then you said you didn't want to talk about it until I'd seen it, and I said, well, I will make sure to see it for next week, and here we are. Yeah.
I wish I'd rewatched Dune instead of Curious Georgia Halloween Boo Fest. But I think I got it. I think I still have enough of that experience etched on my mind.
I will go out of the way and say right now that I think you probably watched the much deeper film, personally, but
well, here's what I will say. First of all, spoilers for Dune Part 1, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yes,
is,
yeah.
let's
which is
just
now on the
talk
title card.
about, is there now? There's no break. Usually we give no break. We're just talking about it. Oh my God. Why is that still the title card for this fucking movie?
I mean, I'm surprised it was the title card because I don't think that they knew whether or not they'd get a part 2 until like 3 weeks after the movie came out, huh?
They didn't. They just found out. They found out over the weekend that they were confirmed because everybody involved with it tweeted out the photo of Dune Part 2. But like it was very much, it was originally called Dune Part 1, right? And Denis Villeneuve was all like, I'm excited to do it, but I need to do it as 2 separate movies. There's just too much to cover to put it into one single movie.
So first of all, let me put a stop right there. I know a lot of people have been talking about 2 movies, and even he's been talking about 2 movies. But I have a sneaking suspicion that this is going to become 3 movies. But anyway, so
I don't doubt
whatever,
that.
yeah.
I don't doubt that at all, considering this movie covers like the first 80 pages of the book.
I mean, the big thing for me, and so like I want to make sure that I separate out my whole thing about I have a passing love of Dune. Like I will not say that I am as deep into it as some people are. I mean, there's 16 books, there's like 5 different board games, there's a whole bunch of video games and side stories and all that sort of stuff. Like you can go deep on Dune, and I am not that. I am not going to claim to be that. However, I will say that Dune is probably one of my favorite epics, one of my favorite sci-fi epics when it comes down to them, and I look at Dune, the main book, as like watching like the first 3 Star Wars together, or even reading the Lord of the Rings. Like there's an expanse to those stories, and a way in which those stories break down and things like that, that I kind of put them all in the same echelon, right? And out of them, I actually Dune squeaks out usually as my favorite most of the time when I talk to people about it or think about it, because there's just some really good stories, some really good characters, some really good like commentary, even though it's like now super thin and problematic, but the fact that it is actually questioning a lot of the stuff that it's presenting is important. There's just a lot of cool things that you can do with Dune, right? So like I need to separate that part of me and say, like, watching this movie, I need to make sure that the things that I don't like about this film are related to this film and not related to some like fanboy like nature, right? Because I don't want to fall into that trap. And so far, I don't hear a lot of people falling into that, and that's actually really cool. It might be because Dune is one of those things that everybody talks about how they loved reading, but nobody ever actually has. Even I, to that point, have read it in pieces once in my life and started it like 15 times and put it down. That's the other thing about it, is I really love the story. There are characters I love, but it is also one of those things where I think its parts are better than its sum in a lot of places. The book is, in my opinion, overwritten, for example. Like, I think there's way too much. But I feel the same way about Lord of the Rings. Tolkien will go on for 20 minutes about what a hillside looks like. I'm like, I don't care about that. Like, that's just not, right? So in a lot of ways, that's why film speaks to me a lot more than the books do and things like that. So I think that this movie is being praised a lot for the right reasons, but I suspiciously don't hear a lot of people like talking about some of the more problematic elements of it. And I don't mean problematic as in like racism or anything like that. In fact, I think that they do some really interesting moves regarding that. I mean more in terms of just like Zendaya is introduced, then disappears, then introduced, then disappears, then introduced, then disappears, then introduced, and then roll credits. So, like, from a movie making standpoint, what the fuck is going on? If they never got a part two, that's crazier than anything in the David Lynch version of this movie of this story, right? Like, man, there's just some weird shit. I also yeah, so this comes back to where to bring it back to where how this rant started for me. There's some pieces missing that if they're going to continue to tell this story in any fashion, they need to introduce. One of the main characters in the original story well, two of the main characters are the Emperor, which you never saw hide nor hair of at this point in the story, but also the Emperor's first daughter, who serves as a love interest to Paul as he's in the House Atreides, which by the end of this movie no longer exists. So, like, to introduce her to the story going forward is not impossible, but to introduce her in a way in which their relationship can form in the way that it's supposed to, because for all intents and purposes, she's supposed to be married to Paul in order to bring houses together. Like, it's supposed to be a political move that they get married. And then not only is she not in this movie, but then they straight up introduce that idea in a moment with Paul, where Timothée Chalamet says the line, "I will talk to the Emperor. He has daughters and no sons. He will need to marry off one of them." And somebody goes, "That's ridiculous." And it's just like, oh, fuck you then. So not only did you write out this entire character, but you're also completely throwing out that entire concept of the plot line. So, like, either that happens in the future movie and that becomes a really dumb line, or you don't plan on that happening, and what the fuck are you doing with this story at this point? Because that's an entire third of the story that's just missing in this movie.
So, where Sejohn shared his connection to Dune, is now time for me to share my connection to Dune, which is the people who tended to congregate around me in high school. There was one morning where all of them were reading Dune, and I'm like, oh, that's something, huh? I'm not being part of that group. Sorry. That is just like,
I think you just joined a book club and didn't like the reading part, Dev, but
no.
fine.
This was like, we would all hang out. Like, I had the place where I hung out, and various people would cycle in and out of hanging out front of the radio station with me. And there's one day, the group of people, like 5 of them were reading Dune, while the rest of us had our normal conversation. And it's just like, oh, okay, let's see what happens with this. And that's just the thing. So, like, there's one. My second experience with Dune is the Billy and Mandy episode where they see their future, and
Nice.
Mandy has turned herself into a giant worm, which is inspired by Dune. And I only know that because there's a joke about it being inspired by Dune in the episode. And I'm like, oh, I guess Dune's got people who turn themselves into sandworms, I guess. That's something. And then the last one is fear is the mind killer. Like, use the force, or get to the One Ring, Frodo, of those franchises. I've always loved the phrase fear is the mind killer, but mostly because in terms of fear, it's not something that I deal with very often. I used to be afraid very much when I was younger, and then I realized the limitations of it. And then someone was like, yeah, well, fear's the mind killer. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And they're like, yeah, that's from Dune. You might want to read it. And I'm like, yeah, no. You want to know? And then I tell the story I've just told. And we're not getting stuck in a loop. That's not going to happen today. So I had no experience with Dune going into this film. So as you're telling about the elimination of the Emperor and his daughter, my initial thought process is, well, we live in a post-Lost universe, right? And that whole thing, as Paul Atreides is learning the ways of the desert, right? The desert power, in the next movie, like, it'd be really good narratively if you laid that against his experiences as an emperor and in political society, right? Like, sort of a Godfather Part 2 type of thing, right? Seeing how they mirror and how they differ. But then you're right. I had forgotten about the line where he's like, well, the emperor only has daughters. He'll need a male heir. Because, like, I remember it as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh, yeah, that was like a moment where, like, oh, yeah, like, this is just sort of like everybody's calling it Game of Thrones meets Star Wars, and I don't know anything about Game of Thrones, so that doesn't work for me either.
Yeah.
It just feels like royal intrigue, right? Why do we need to look at fictional royalty when there's so much actual history about royal families doing that kind of
Yeah.
shit in order to strengthen themselves?
Well, yeah. Right,
Yeah.
and so part of the reason it gets compared to Game of Thrones so much is because much like George R. R. Martin kind of retelling the War of the Roses in Game of Thrones and like using historical moments and in that, and then and that's why people talk about it being so grounded and accurate in so many ways, because it is literally based on some things that happened, right? So Dune is Frank Herbert using the same thing with colonial expansion into actually into to India, although there's a lot of ways to read it as the Middle East and oil. Although I think that if you look back, it was published long before, not long before we were in the Middle East, but before that was like the hot topic to write about. So maybe he was just kind of onto something before anybody else was. I don't know. This is what I mean. Is like it's not hard for me to like have a conversation about Dune, but like I have just enough knowledge to be dangerous. I don't like I'm gonna say something here that's gonna piss somebody off because I'm misrepresenting something or missaying something. But essentially, I like watching Dune and knowing kind of some of the stuff that has to happen. It's really interesting the choices that they made about what they didn't focus on. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I don't enjoy the movie. I gotta say that, like, all in all, I want to watch it again. I think it's a gorgeous film. And I think the moments that are there, I think it tells a cohesive story. It's not like I felt the movie was lacking in any major way. It's just that until the moment where it doesn't go anywhere because it's the first part of a movie, right? So like that's my only real like major criticism about it, is for a movie that they didn't know whether or not they were going to get to make part two. They sure as hell were banking on a part two, because there's so much stuff that's just introduced and then just left open, and it's really unfortunate, because there's so many ways that they could have really done justice to the idea of a part one, and there is more to come maybe. But I don't know, man. This movie is Dune is one of those stories that was always called unfilmable, right? Which is what made the David Lynch version such a huge deal. And there's another version that never came to fruition that has a whole documentary made about it. Can't remember the artist that tried to make that version that fell apart. Like it is one of those ones that's considered impossible to make. So in that vein, I think that, how do you say his last name? Because I want to keep calling him Villeneuve, but that's not right. Villeneuve. Well, I think that Villeneuve does a phenomenal job of filming the unfilmable. I think he's got some hella good talent for visuals and moments. It's just that I think in terms of the biggest thing for me is the story of this movie is teetering on basically how good the next movie does, and no movie should have to depend on another film to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, what it looks like from everything, because as soon as it came up Dune Part 1, I'm like, oh, okay, so I know that this is not going to be a full story. I know it's not going to be a complete story. And that's weird because that's not what the marketing has been. The marketing has very much been Dune, Dune,
Yep.
Dune, 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 Dune.
Yeah, I'll be honest, kind of threw me for a loop when I found out part two had been given the go-ahead, because I didn't realize it had been broken into parts. And so when I saw part one as the title card, I was like, oh, they must have always planned it to be. Like, it was kind of news to me in the last couple of days that was the way that this was going. I mean, especially with a runtime of 2 hours and 40 minutes, right? Like, I just kind of assumed that they had just, cut some shit, squished some shit, and just made Dune. In a weird way, I was kind of excited when I found out that there would be more of it, but now watching it, I really just wish that they had just made a 4-hour movie. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Especially when you're watching it on HBO Max and there's another 4-hour movie out there. Like,
Yeah.
like you can watch that in color or grayscale.
I mean, we'd be remiss if we didn't point out, now that you've mentioned it, that it did kick the shit out of Justice League and a lot of other HBO. In fact, I think it's the #1 streaming success for them.
Yeah.
So like all of these decisions that I'm here giving it crap for clearly didn't work against it in any way. So like there you go.
Right. But it was originally, he was told you can do this as 2 parts, and that was when it was going to go to theaters, right? And it really felt like that whole situation of, we're saying it's 2 parts, but then if it fails, we'll quietly sweep it under the rug. We've seen it before, right?
Yeah.
Divergent Allegiant was going to be 2 films, and then when Allegiant just shit its pants, that story is still unresolved and will be unresolved forever. Remember when
Right.
they were talking about there's going to be a direct-to-TV finale, 6 years ago? And that still hasn't happened, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And at this point, everybody's moved on.
Well, I mean, the MCU and Lord of the Rings and all of these other Star Wars, like you see all of these other franchises where they are extended contracts, and when people sign on, they sign on for a number of movies. That's why part of the reason why it was so weird to me is you didn't hear about anybody that had signed on for a Dune Part 2 because like legitimately that was part of the celebration this weekend was like they had all of 4 people signed on for 2 movies. Other than that, the rest of the cast was easy to let go. So like if they never made a Part 2, there's only 4 people that they would have been held accountable to.
Pay out, yeah.
Right. Like that's to be that close to the line of not getting the sequel that you're planning on and to still put so much into just hoping for that sequel. I you know what it is? I think I'm starting to understand why Villeneuve and so many people have been pushing so hard for this movie to succeed and to be seen the way that they want to see it. Is now that I understand that like half the people out there that have been pushing this movie for the last 2 years aren't even people that were even guaranteed a spot in the second film. I get it. Like this was important to them because they wanted to be able to come back. And it doesn't forgive some of the weird stuff that I think Villeneuve said about the ways that like movies quote unquote should be watched. And he got a little too far up his ass. He was right up there next to Nolan, like talking about like the ways in which film has to be experienced in order to be truly understood and that sort of crap. And like I'm never gonna really be able to forget that he's that kind of filmmaker now. But just like with Nolan, I can still respect the fact that he can make a hell of a film.
I think the worst thing about Villeneuve is how it inspired other people to go out there and be like, it needs to be seen in theaters. Because it's like, it's one thing for the director to say that, because I get it, right? You want your art to be experienced the way that you intended it to be experienced. And no film director is saying, I want this to be watched on a 6.5-inch screen. Yeah. Right, while you're on the toilet. Nobody wants that. They want it in the cinema house, especially the people who are still in Hollywood, right? Like there could very well be up and coming directors who like, I want to make my movie so that it can be consumed on an iPhone. But
it stinks of no faith in your audience, no belief that there is a person out there that's on your level. It makes it sound like you feel like you're higher up than everybody else because you understand this thing that you're worried these people don't understand. But just like with piracy, when people say pirating a movie hurts it, it's just like no, because the kid that pirated that movie either A, probably paid to already see it, or if he pirated it and he didn't pay for it, he was never going to pay for it. That's the mistake that people make. Is people think that if a movie gets pirated, that means that person's ticket money is lost. No, that ticket money was never going to get made. Much in the same way that you can complain about that guy watching your movie in pieces on his phone on the bus on the ride to work, but when that guy works 10 hours a day and can't make it to the movies, but he wants to see your movie so bad that he's willing to give you $10 to watch it digitally on his phone on his ride to work for a week, like respect that audience member, man. Like that person is doing what he can to be a part of your art, and like that's the part that really gets me, is that belief, that understand that the person that is willing to do that somehow wouldn't have been as good of an audience member as the one that paid money to go and see it in theaters. And that's crap. To me, those are people are the ones that are more willing to put up with bullshit.
Right.
I
mean, you're watching Dune like you're reading the book at that point. So it's strange. It's just one of those things. But it was the fact that my timeline and all my social media has been people saying you got to see it in theaters, and I'm like, you know what? I watched it at home. I loved it. And that's the thing. I haven't admitted it yet. I loved it. I was a little intimidated by the 2-hour, 40-minute runtime, but mostly because anytime I've been in a conversation with somebody about Dune, I wanted to like take my eyes out and shove them in my ears so that I don't need to look at this person and I don't need to hear him anymore. Right? I'll
Yeah,
smell them,
no,
but
I mean, like I too watched it, and I made sure that the reason that I haven't seen it yet was that I didn't have any alone time with the big screen TV and the surround sound. So, like, even though I watched it at home, I didn't just watch it on my computer. I didn't just watch it on my toilet on my phone. I did go out of my way to watch it on my 40-inch screen with the 5.1 surround around me, right? So I watched it as close to a theater experience as I could get because I wanted to. And honestly, the next time I watch it, I want to make sure I do it that way again. After that, if I watch it on and off while I'm at work on my computer, then I watch it that way. But I do believe that for me, I really enjoyed it on a big screen with big sound. But I'm not going to get on social media and say that's the only way to see this movie. I think people should watch this movie, and I think if that means that it's watching it on your laptop while you're at work or while you're studying, like do that. Because like the first time I ever watched Dune, the sci-fi miniseries, was I had actually gotten a $6 copy of the DVD box set from like Newberry Comics while I was a freshman, and I watched that on like my Vio's laptop, like my Sony Vio laptop that I had gotten, and like I sat there and I remember loading in each disc and starting it up and like in one night banging through that shit, and I loved the hell out of that. And that is a loving memory that I still hold to this day of Dune. So like to say that Dune can't be experienced in that way, it'll ruin the experience. Just it's bullshit.
yeah, I agree. It's just, and that was because let me tell you, as much as I loved the sequel to Sicario, Soldado, Day of the
Yeah,
Sicario,
yeah,
that is, I think, the best movie in the Sicario series because it answered a lot of the questions and it didn't sell us that Emily Blunt was the main character when Emily Blunt is not the main character. Spoilers
no,
for Sicario. I don't want to be rude to it, but they made it look like she was the main character, and she's not. The
Benicio del Toro
titular
is right.
character, the Sicario, is the main character. But she was hot after Edge of Tomorrow, so that was the narrative that they pushed. Sorry, it bothers me still to this day. But then I'm like, well, I saw Sicario, I'll see the sequel, and I'm like, oh, when I have no expectations going into this movie, I really like this world, and I'm
Hmm.
excited to watch both of them together. But then, because of that, because I liked Sicario enough, right? I went and I saw Arrival. And if I had to have a complaint about Arrival, I mean, I have complaints about Arrival. I don't need to have one. I mean, it's not like it's a listicle that I could pull out and send to BuzzFeed, Devon's top 10 problems with Arrival. But after the script, which just has some cringe, groan worthy lines in it, it is the sound mix that I did not find very enjoyable. So
Hmm.
like Dune and everybody talking about the sound, and I'm like, you know what? Watching it at home with my sound bar, which is a nice sound bar, but it's not 5.1 or 7.2 sound, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't overwhelmed by the sound. Like it was enough to do it. Where like in Arrival, there were moments where I'm like, all this is sound to me, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Plus, when I saw Arrival, shootings in movie theaters had recently become a bigger thing again,
Yeah.
and a guy walked in like 10 minutes into the movie with a saxophone case and then kept walking around the theater like every 7 to 14 minutes. So it wasn't a comfortable movie going experience.
Jesus Christ, that sounds like no. It sounds like you didn't watch Arrival, is what it sounds like. It
Yeah.
sounds, it
Yeah.
sounds like Arrival was in the background while you shit your pants for 2 hours.
Well, and then can I
Um,
tell you just the weirdest part about it is then he ended up waiting till the end of the credits, which I always do, and then I ended up having like a half-hour conversation with the weird saxophone guy who walked around during Arrival because he's just kind of like glommed onto me. And I'm like, well, this is fun. This is a fun experience. You know what? I should give Arrival another shot. There's my thing because I loved Dune. I really did love Dune. And where I was trying to
yeah,
get before is the reason why the original title and the original title card is Dune Part 1 is because they had said you're getting the two movies. And it was only in the wake of coronavirus and movie theaters
yeah,
changing where Warner Brothers was like, the second movie isn't greenlit anymore, right? Like we had already
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
hedged our bets in the fact that we only had the four people who were signed on for a second movie to begin with, your four main characters,
yeah,
the ones that you need if you're going to do a sequel. And if it performs well, even with, the COVID and how theaters are doing, and with the same day HBO Max and theaters release schedule, then we will begin to talk about a second movie. But by all accounts, this movie was done and in the can, and he had been told, you're getting the second movie, and then they changed it. And they changed it with enough time for, like, you can re-edit it if you'd like, right? So that it ends.
Yeah.
So that it has an ending. Like, they told him that long enough in, and that's why it was so important that it actually succeed, so that they do greenlit that sequel. And it's so weird, right? Especially, I mean, we've talked a lot about Ghostbusters Answer the Call, right? Our last very special episode. And that's weird. We don't usually do that on the regular episodes. But Dune just feels so much like shades of that, in the fact that after 1 week, we've greenlit the sequel. But I feel like if Dune doesn't continue, like, until Dune Part 2 is in production, until I see Dune Part 2, I'm not going to believe that movie's coming.
Like, fair enough. Man, I can't disagree. I mean, like, I think the big thing is going to be award season. I think if it doesn't pull off like an amazing run in the award season, I think it's going to be in some serious danger of them bothering to continue with it. Because right now, like, they were happy to put out all the news about it being so successful for their streaming service, but this is a month after they announced that starting in 2022, 2023, like, they're not going to do the streaming and in theaters thing anymore. Like, they've already put their foot down that that's just not going to be part of the formula anymore.
At any time in 2022, when they deem it okay, they will cut it off.
Yeah,
that's basically been the marketing of it is. And
there's no way this is a 2022 movie. Like, after what it took to make the first one, like, we're talking 2023 minimum.
Right.
So, like,
and that's the thing. But because they've really enjoyed this whole streaming thing, right? They've seen a lot of success with the same day and date releases.
Yeah.
They wanted to tell people, you know, as it's still uncertain out there, we are going to extend it for some films going into 2022, but understand that at any time, it's not a contract like we made with you at the beginning of 2021, where we said, these are the movies that are coming to HBO Max, we promise.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I mean, like I said, I really enjoy a lot of the stuff. I mean, the ways in which the, like, kind of the heaviness of this version of Dune. A lot of the times when Dune is put on screen, there's an effort to do a lot of, you know, flowy robes and things like that. And it's not that stuff's not present in this movie, but it's that stuff in addition to, like, the heavy armor that you see guys wearing, the helmets and suits that are present throughout, and the differences in those suits throughout. Like, that's the other thing, is it's not just like we were shown one set of armor and everybody's now wearing it, right? Like, there's maybe 5 or 6 important different pieces of armor that you have to actually tune yourself into if you want to have any idea what's happening at certain points of the film. There's like that kind of stuff. The visual on the ships, that things are not dirty a la like a Firefly, but definitely not clean. So, like, very much like a Star Wars inspired, like, grunginess. Like, things hit debris sometimes, so they get a little scruffed up, right?
They're landing in the desert, so you can write "Wash me" on any one of these ships.
You know what I really loved is that I don't know if there's many ships within that movie that you can point to as truly symmetrical. Even the ones that are made symmetrical, they go out of their way to design imperfections in them. Like at one point, one of the ships is missing a piece of its wing, right? But then there's other ships that are just straight up just not designed symmetrical. There's a ship that lands early in, like, the first 10 minutes of the movie that when it turns sideways, one end of it is much longer than the other, and they compensate with, like, the legs. And, like, so as a nerd, like, way into sci-fi stuff, while I'm sitting there being like, well, why isn't his character there? I'm also being like, that ship looks really rad, though. like so, you know what I mean? So the ways in which this movie is definitely like speaking to me is pretty weird and pretty cool. Like, I have to say, I enjoyed the conversation I had with this movie the whole time.
As somebody who knew nothing about it, I was blown away by all the very different visual styles, the world building that was present by being shown, not told. I love that. I absolutely love that type of stuff. But where Dune really succeeded for me is the fact that it clipped. It clipped along. The only reason why I was aware of the fact that, like, 2 hours had gone by is because I had to use the restroom. And I'm like, I've been right there with this movie, but now I gotta go to the bathroom, and I don't want to pause it. I want to just watch the rest of it because I'm involved. I don't want to break it up because it sold me, it hooked me, and I'm here for it. The idea of the voice and the cool way we're like, well, that guy's deaf, so like my one power here is completely useless. Paul, figure out a way to make it work. Yeah. It's cool. It's a cool movie. If you're on the fence, watch it. It's worth watching, especially if you have HBO Max ad free. Which, come to find out, that there are levels to HBO Max. I did not realize that. And can I just say,
I don't know when that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can I just say, hooray for HBO Max? I mean, we've been talking about Dune. I've been talking about Curb Your Enthusiasm. I found out something about HBO Max last week that has made it my favorite streaming service, bar none. It is number one for me right now. And that is the fact that when something airs on HBO, it is immediately available on HBO Max. I never knew that before last week.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't know what their schedule was for rotation, but they've been doing pretty good at making sure the stuff that is their monthly like availability is the stuff that's up there.
Oh, I'm talking about series and stuff like that, where like Young Sheldon airs at 8 o'clock on Thursdays, but it's not available on Paramount Plus until after 8 a.m. on Friday.
Yeah.
So like that kind of sucks, right? Like that's that old thing. When Curb Your Enthusiasm, it's supposed to air Sundays at 10:30, right? That's when it's scheduled to air. And last week, because of Succession or some finale that was on before it, Curb Your Enthusiasm didn't start until 10:45. So I'm like just trying to pass the time until it works. And I'm like, well, what else is on HBO Max, right? I can see it. And it's 10:30, and there's Curb Your Enthusiasm, the new episode, because that's when it's supposed to happen. So like their weekly stuff releasing same time as when it airs, that blew my mind. And it's like, well, like this makes this a worthy thing to have. Because if you're one of those people,
than the Hulu question when you never know when it's going to go up there. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, Hulu, it's shifting. Sometimes it'll be after 8 in the morning. Sometimes it's not until after like 1 p.m. the next day.
There's even times where I don't know if they do this anymore, but they used to do that. The last week's episode was not available until this week's episode was airing, so you couldn't like catch up, or they would wait until the day of with the idea that you would use that day to catch up. But that really screwed a lot of people who used to be just like, I pay for this service so I can watch this thing so that I don't have to watch it on time. You really wrecking my week when everybody gets to watch it 6 days before me.
Yeah. A lot of that has been discontinued with Hulu, I will say.
It was a huge complaint, so I'm not too surprised about that once contracts started to roll around. But yeah.
It was advertisers. Advertisers were like, well, we want people to watch it live when it airs. And then they found a way to make advertisers happy both ways. So I don't know how or why, but how they're doing it. But that has almost been completely eliminated. Where mostly it is that like sort of 12-hour window that you have before you can watch it on your streaming services. So if you're like, I need to see what happens to Young Sheldon this week, you have to be there at 8 o'clock on Thursday night.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's Paramount Plus, so that's a different animal. But I was very impressed by it. And I wanted to just give HBO Max that like thumbs up. Not an ad, right? Hashtag the State Report says so, not an ad. But HBO Max, they're doing it right. Sorry, is there anything more for Dune, or do you want to move on to N64? Because that was a comment. I didn't know that we'd be talking about N64.
Well, because in addition to a lot of the weird stuff that's been going on with the emulation stuff on the Switch, I have also been spending some time this week trying to work an emulator myself on my own damn computer. And I didn't think the problems that I'd be having on my own home computer would extend to the Nintendo offices. I would have thought they would have been much more on the ball than me. But we're both kind of stuck, Dev. Yeah. Neither of us can figure out how to emulate the goddamn controller.
That's a comment. So I have a friend who has not had any Nintendo Switch Online presence, right? He's like, I'm not going to do it. I don't really play a lot of these games online. The only one is Super Mario Maker 2, and you got like a trial with that. Plus, it had a built-in story mode, so that even if you didn't have the online, you had stuff that you could do with that game. So he just never saw the point in getting it. But when they announced N64 games, he's like, I'm getting on board. I'm getting on board now that they got N64 games. So that's good, right? Like, they understood their audience. They understood some of their holdouts. And they gave them the product that they wanted. But as somebody who has an active account through till January, I'm not in any rush to level up to the expansion pass.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to wait and hear how things go, I think, over the next few months before I decide if I even want to put the money in to level up, even once it comes time to re-up, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, like, you're not wrong. Like, I definitely see no point in buying into the larger number right now, because from everything that's come out about what's going to happen with the N64 is those games are going to be almost unplayable, and that's over exaggerating in some ways, but it ain't going to be a fun experience.
I mean, they're unplayable. The big issue, right? Because one of the big selling points for it was any of the 4-player games, right? So like Mario Kart, they can be played with 4 players using the online service that this is inherently a part of.
Right, right.
And I don't know if you've gotten to see any of those PowerPoint presentations on like your social media feed or someone streaming it. It doesn't work. The Nintendo Switch Online, the actual online component of that, has not gotten any better than when we were watching PowerPoint presentations of Super Mario Maker 2. Or when we tried to play Mario Golf, the latest Mario Golf, and it was like stuttering as we did speed golf.
Like dropping us and things like that. Yeah.
Like if I'm paying more money, I'm going to want a more robust experience.
Yeah.
And that's not what they did. They charged us more to give us the same 20 Sega Genesis games that you can get for $5 on Steam, and some N64 games that are poorly emulated at the best of times.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't know what I thought they were going to do in terms of the controller, because like the N64 controller is like a beast, right? Like the number of different moving parts on that has been hard for people to kind of figure out. And it's not that Nintendo hadn't cracked it. It's not that emulators hadn't cracked it. It's the recreating it on the user end that has been kind of the hard bit. Like, so getting a computer to do those things is easily doable now, but now getting it back into a customer's hand that maybe is not so savvy, right? Like, and that's one of the things that Nintendo really had to solve, that emulator guys, like, I don't want to use the term hackers, but like this, that they didn't have to really worry too much about. People have still been working on it because it's a cool puzzle and a cool project, and like there's a lot of really good alternatives out there, but not a good one, not like a solid one, right? If there was, Nintendo would have stole it.
I mean, what you have to remember is with the N64, Nintendo invented analog control, right? Not invented it, but brought it into the gaming space in a way that it was never seen before. The DualShock came out after this system came out and introduced analog control to that system, to the PlayStation, to that system. You know, that system that I'm staring at right now, but I can't think of its name.
And it's not that the system didn't exist before the controller did. Like,
right.
Like, yeah.
Right. So,
no, I mean,
so that, and then Sega Saturn brings it in with Knights. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But, famously, the PlayStation almost was the N64, right? Until Nintendo broke off from them and all that sort of weird back history there. But yeah, there's like that idea that they created a new system of control. So it really kind of feeds into a lot of stuff that happens later with things like motion control and stuff too, and them trying things that don't always necessarily work out. But you have to remember that, like, in the past, they have some gangbusters, you know? Like, I mean, even didn't they own the patent on like the D-pad for the longest time?
Yeah, they owned the patent on the D-pad for forever, which
Yeah,
is why the D-pad on the Genesis was so different, where it's like the one big chunky guy that you sort of rotate around, and where even if you look at PlayStation controllers, each one of the directions is like a separate button, kind of. And
right,
then,
right.
like, because you couldn't just have that solid D-pad. And I mean,
Yeah,
like, and sort of the layout for controllers always going forward is invented with the Super Nintendo, right?
right,
The four
right.
face buttons and the shoulder buttons, that came from them as well. So when you look at the N64, you need to think about the fact that they invented a new way to interact with a video game. And at the time, it was so experimental. If you
Yeah,
were touching the analog stick when you started up a game, the calibration would be broken,
yeah,
right? Because they just
yeah.
didn't know what to do.
Yeah, you had to. There were actually ways to recalibrate, like making sure that you put your controller down and that the Z stick was sticking up, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
For sure.
That you
Yeah,
had, like, it was
and
the usage of the L button was
yeah.
basically to recalibrate your N64 controller.
So in a lot of ways, it feels like Nintendo had really one job in doing this, in upping this price and offering N64 games. Their one job was figuring out how to get that controller back into people's hands, or to figure out a way to create a control method for those games that didn't require that controller. And if they couldn't do it, they shouldn't have done it, is kind of my view on it right now. And the fact that they didn't means that I have no interest in playing those games. Like it's a pretty straight line from the fact that they have not figured out how to properly control those games. And like, no joke, I've got a couple of like emulators and ROMs that I've been kind of touching on for the last few months, just because ever since they announced they were going to do this, I was kind of like, man, I'd love to get back into some N64 games. And then I found out what games weren't going to be available and was like instantly just like, well, those are obviously the ones I want. So, like trying out a couple of those games and realizing that, like, I've got my Stadia controller, I've got this Buffalo controller that you got me, Dev, like trying all these different methods, or even just a keyboard, just trying to figure out if I could teach myself ways to play games that way, and still no luck. Like, it's just nothing quite feels fluid, nothing quite feels right. All credit to Nintendo and the N64 controller that they made some amazing games that played on that controller, but it seems like that's kind of really the beginning for me of where they kind of started to do too much for themselves and not thinking about like all of gaming, right? Like the second that they designed that N64 controller in that way and made games that worked with that controller, and you needed that controller to play them, that was kind of the moment where they started putting their real, like, again, putting their foot down about, like, here's what's going to be the Nintendo thing going forward. And now here we are with the Switch, where like certain things require Joy-Cons and things like that, so you can buy as many Pro controllers as you want, but if you don't have the ability to play in this way, then you're out of luck. Like, that kind of stuff sucks. And then add to that the Joy-Cons all break within a matter of 6 months of owning them. Like, it puts a whole damper on the whole affair, man. And so when they announced that they were going to do this and then didn't get the N64 controls right, it feels like another just nail in the coffin for me in this stuff. And that's not the right way of putting it, because it's not like I want to throw my Switch out just because the N64 emulation doesn't work. But it's just that idea that just like they Nintendo'd it. They straight up Nintendo'd this launch.
I am jealous of the people who get to enjoy it, who are finding the enjoyment, who are not bothered by the fact that the controls are just hot garbage. I mean, I'm somebody who played the Mega Man Anniversary Collection on my GameCube, where they switched the shoot to the A button and jump to the B button, which, like, is not how those games are designed at all. Like, it's
Yeah.
completely retraining yourself to play the games in that way. And then even to the point that, like, they just made the biggest button the fire button. And, like, that's great in, like, concept and idea, but then when you're playing it, you have to do those two things at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Mega Man work. So, like, I've played with bad controls. I've modified to bad controls. And the thing that I don't understand, especially when your Switch will allow you to customize your controller for Switch games. You can go into the controls and you can make it so the B button is the A button and vice versa, right? They've given you that level of control on the hardware level. But for some reason, it's heart or its shoes, the Nintendo 64 emulator does not allow for that.
And just so that people kind of have an understanding of what we're talking about, because maybe they have not been aware of this, but the way that the Nintendo Switch is emulating the N64 controller is it's taking, first of all, it's taking the C stick and splitting it into two different places, which is the wildest thing for me. So there's the right and the down are now your X and Y buttons, right? And then like they put the other two somewhere else on the controller. Then on top of that, you're missing the Z trigger, right? Isn't the Z trigger just non-existent
The Z
in
trigger is the L button.
Mm.
Well,
So
it's the ZL button.
ZL button,
Yeah.
right? Because the ZL and the ZR didn't exist on the N64, so they saved their butt there because they've got two extra buttons to work with in that place. Yeah, so like they're just things are just in random places, and if it's your first time coming to it or it's been a while since you've come to it, you may not notice this sort of thing, but there are people, and I am one of them, that just have that kind of muscle memory from the N64. Because as much as the Super Nintendo is my favorite Nintendo system of all time, the N64 is probably like my generation's Nintendo system, right? Like the Super Nintendo kind of was in my house, and I watched my dad play it more than I played it. There were a couple of games I played for sure, but more than anything, it was something that my dad and his friends played with. The N64 was something Zach and I played with, and going forward, the Wii and things like that. But like the N64 was the first one that was ours, you know? And so like that muscle memory that people talk about with the Nintendo or with the Super Nintendo, that people talk about with their Segas and things like that, I have that with the N64. And so I'm just completely all over the place in trying to recreate that experience for myself. And then insult to injury, Nintendo is apparently selling N64 controllers that you can use at some point. Are they going to do that?
Yeah. In fact, I ordered one. Right. I
Yeah.
don't have the N64 stuff, but my big issue with this whole thing is those analog sticks on N64 controllers, because of the early adopter nature of them,
Mhm.
notoriously failed.
Yeah.
Like they did not have a great shelf life, and it's like, okay, so you guys are going to recreate the N64 controller, but I hope you use a different array for the analog stick, right? And
Considering the Joy-Con problem, yeah, God, please.
right? So all I did was comb the internet for reviews that focused on the analog stick, right? To see if I could find somebody who talked about it. And when nobody did, and then after being out of stock since they were announced, them finally coming back into stock, I'm like, I'm going to be the one who has to do this research. If I don't get one in my hands, I'm never going to have the answer to this question.
Yeah.
So I have one coming because I want to see if the analog feels better or if it's still hard plastic on hard plastic and doomed to fail.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what it's going to be. And I also feel like there are some things that also need to be brought up, and that's the B and A button in the emulation are the B and A button on the Switch controller, which is crazy when you consider that the B and A button on the N64 controller were basically where Y and B are on it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they were a downward diagonal so that it'd be very easy to move between them. So you talk about muscle memory, that's a huge change.
Yep.
Going from B is above A and you can like kind of just hit them both with your thumb to B is below A and you need to completely reverse what you're doing with your thumb to interact with it. That's a huge change. And also because I sent you that infographic of the controls. It is, you can use the right stick for the C buttons, but they're still buttons.
Mm-hmm.
So you're using an analog stick to emulate buttons, and that never works out the way you want it to. Yeah. Right? It's not going to be like using an analog stick to control a camera, because that's what the C buttons are. They were originally your camera buttons because you're existing in a 3D space. So if you're playing Super Mario 64, which that's the biggest issue, because we already had this game on the Switch, right, as part of the Anniversary Collection, the Super Mario 3D All-Stars Collection, and that game had Y as your B button and A as your jump button, and you could use the right stick, and it emulated closer to an actual camera as opposed to just buttons. They were still buttons, but they kind of made it feel like they weren't.
Yeah.
It still wasn't smooth and crisp like if you were controlling a camera in a modern game. So then for them to not use that version of it on the Nintendo Switch Online and to go back to like a poor emulation of that ROM
Yeah.
just boggles my mind.
Yeah, I mean, like, they had already kind of half solved the problem, and then in true Nintendo fashion, they just kind of they walked away from it, and that's one of the other things, is that none of this sounds like a problem that they're going to bother spending any time to solve. In their minds, they're giving the people what they wanted, and this is just to shut us up so that they can move on to something else that they want to do. Like, it doesn't feel like this is a thing that they're going to pay much attention to, especially if you look at the rest of their online presence and the ways in which they've never solved any of those issues. They've just kind of piled on a bunch of stuff that we like in hopes that we stop complaining about the one thing that we don't. And, in some cases it works. In most cases it hasn't, though. And in more cases it's not working. So they've really, they did what they always do with this launch, wherein that they overpromised something that they couldn't quite deliver. And it's just bumming me out. But it's just enough that a year from now, I probably am still going to try it out once, and maybe I'll enjoy it for a few months before whatever new system Nintendo puts out I buy. And then at that point, I'll be on to complaining about that one. It's just a really weird, it's a really sad, souring experience considering how many good experiences I've had on the Switch this year. And so it's just a bummer. That's all.
It's kind of the first truly disappointing Nintendo Switch experience. It's like the first time that they've really dropped the ball. And I think that the only reason why we notice it, because they have dropped the ball in other ways, right? The fact that Super Mario Maker 2 was a slideshow presentation. Like, they've had issues, but, you don't really notice them in the grand scheme of things. Because, so the multiplayer doesn't work on Super Mario Maker 2, but everything else works, right?
Yeah.
I can make levels, I can play levels. There's no issue with the inherent thing that I bought the game for.
Well, and the multiplayer was a late ad, right? Like,
No, it was available from the start.
Was the multiplayer available immediately on that one? Maybe I'm thinking of the first one or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like for what I mean more to that point is that it wasn't the reason people were buying it. People were buying Mario Maker to make levels to then share with their friends to play. The act of making multiplayer levels didn't really become a thing until later, where maybe like once like a bunch of Twitch guys kind of started getting through some of the already made stuff and things, they wanted more to do. But the bigger push with that game was the focus was elsewhere. So the fact that Nintendo's focus was elsewhere was not forgivable, but understandable, maybe is the right way of saying it. Whereas here, like this online thing, like all this tells me is that this just wasn't where their focus was. This was just an add-on because so many people have been asking for it, and they figured, well, let's do this so we can get a little extra cash. But at the end of the day, this wasn't where they were focused. And if this isn't where they were focused, then where were they? Because nothing else has improved.
Right. It really. If it were free, if it were already included, if these N64s were part of the existing cost, right? And even if it went up like $5 for the subscription, I don't think people would be looking at it as the way that they currently are. It's the fact that it is an extra service that you are paying for that is not worth the price of admission.
Yeah. It's way too much more money. Yeah.
It's double the cost for not double the product. And the quality is still the same as it ever was. And while we're still rolling with Nintendo, I'd like to share some of my thoughts about Mario Party Superstars.
Sure, let's go on a down note. Let's do it.
No, we'll be able to elevate before we go away. Don't worry. I think I have something up my sleeve. So Mario Party Superstars came out, and Super Mario Party, the Nintendo Switch game that already came out in the Mario Party series, is a great game. My only complaint about it was it was Joy-Con only, right? Mm-hmm. That was my only issue with that game. Everything else about it was fantastic. So then when Mario Party Superstars comes along, and it's like you can use your controller, and we're going to be playing homage to a bunch of the original games in the series, bringing back old games and old boards. It's going to be a love letter to the Mario Party series. I was on board, right? I was excited for it. And then it's a $60 game that comes with 5 game boards, and all you can do is play the mini games or play the board game version of Super Mario Party. It does not feel like a full $60 experience.
Wait, the mini games are not included in the board?
No, they are in the board,
Oh,
right? So if
okay.
you play you play a game of Mario Party, right, with the 4 people and the mini games come up, or you can go to Minigame Mountain. Those are like the only two things that exist.
Oh,
There's
so they
no
don't have any of the
story
like.
mode, right? There's
Yeah.
like, and I don't know if there was a story mode in the first Mario Party, but there was in Mario Party 8, which was really my first entry point into the series. So
Hmm.
for me, seeing story modes in every Mario Party since 8 and the depth of the story mode for Super Mario Party, I was expecting that in this game. So for it not to be there, it really kind of feels like, oh, this isn't worth my $60.
Mm, yeah. I mean I don't know anybody that cares about the stories in the Super Mario games. Like I know a lot of people for like I so to your point about it maybe not being a $60 experience, like that is definitely something we're talking about. I feel like a lot of what they were doing with this game was aiming for those people that just wanted to sit around and play Mario Party with their friends. And like I know my friends like that all we would ever do is just go straight to the boards and like pick characters and do stuff. Like they weren't there to hang out and play the story mode with me. You know what I mean? Like if I was playing by myself, the story mode was always a nice additional thing, but I never thought of that as the main part of those games. And
But
so like
not
maybe to your point, like if they were not going to include that, then maybe the price should reflect that.
I mean, it's one of those situations where, like, yeah, the story mode is not why I bought Mario Party 8. It was a welcome surprise to find it,
Yeah.
and it was the way that you unlocked other characters, right?
Yep.
But
Yep.
in true, like, Mario games now, right? Everything is unlocked from the beginning, and there are no characters to unlock, right? I'm not going to get to play as Blooper or Hammer Brothers by clearing the story mode, right? Story
Right.
mode was nice because when I didn't have 3 friends to play with, I could still play and enjoy the game. And even
Hmm.
Super Mario Party, they don't have like that full story mode, but they have that cool mode where like you play through all the mini games in
Yeah.
like chunks of 10, and it kind of has a narrative attached to why you're doing that and what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
And like it doesn't have anything like that either. It just has you can go online and play mini games against randoms. Like it doesn't have the single player experience of this game is almost non-existent. And that's I guess understandable in a way, but it's also disappointing when the other games sort of tried to cater to it. It felt like a shift of Mario Party to an esport title.
Yeah, yeah, I could definitely see that for sure. I mean, like, I have not bothered to pick it up because, again, it was such a thing for me and my friends to get together to play it that, like, I will pick it up if a bunch of people are like, "Hey, let's get together and try Mario Party." Like, and then it will serve its purpose to me. But until then,
Right.
I have no reason to buy it.
Well, everybody else in the Say Report family has it. Zach,
Yeah,
Dale, and
well,
I all
so are
have
you
a
saying you want to
copy.
try it online after just talking about how terrible the online
I mean,
experience is?
everybody
Because
on Twitch has been playing it online and having a lovely time. But yeah,
have they
like that's
really?
the thing. Right? They have. It doesn't.
Like,
I
yeah, no,
mean,
like that's a real question. Like, has it been working for people? Because like that's part of the reason I haven't bought it is
it seems to be. I mean, your mileage may vary. You might want to watch the people that you watch on Twitch or the streams that you check and see. But like that was the thing. It seemed like Nintendo, from where Nintendo was standing, succeeded. They
yeah.
made exactly the game that they wanted to make.
Maybe
Um,
this is why they needed to up the price of Nintendo Online is so that they could do enough work on their infrastructure to make at least Mario Party work right.
yeah, like there's that thought. Like it didn't escape me that, oh, that's weird that these two things are kind of coming out on top of each other. So I don't know. But I think where it really hits me the way that it does is 2 months ago, we got the new WarioWare game, Mega Micro Games Incorporated,
Hmm.
or whatever it's called.
Hmm.
And that game has a beautiful story mode, right? For the single player experience, 7 different multiplayer modes. Like, it just feels like a bigger, more full game. And it was sold for $10 less than Mario Party Superstars.
Hmm.
Like, like if I wouldn't be as upset if I paid $60 for both, which is a crazy thing to say, but it's just a fact. like WarioWare. And I think that's really what I've learned, right? Is Mario Party was never my favorite thing to do. I liked Mario Party 8 because it was the Wii times and it was not difficult to find 3 people to play Wii with you, right?
Right, right. Yeah, no, because everybody wanted to check it out. Yeah, and also the time in our life, like we were
We
at
were in
college,
college
and
and
yeah. I mean, so some of these are also just problems of our lives
of
now that
age, yeah, like
yeah. And but when they're putting a game out to cater to people our age because this is a nostalgia grab, right? Like they should consider those kinds of things in that. It's a weird thing all around.
but I think
Like
they
this
did.
whole
I
thing
think
with
what they
Nintendo just being Nintendo,
Yeah,
man.
I think what they considered was if we give it online, those kids who grew up in the same neighborhood who are now all spread out across the country, each of them buys a copy and they get to play together.
Hmm.
But also, and this is a weird thing, right? The online part of the game is not on the cart. It is a separate download to be able to play the game online, which totally feeds into your thought that this was to build up a type of infrastructure specifically for Mario Party.
If we start hearing about improvements in the online experience of like Mario Maker and Mario, Mario Party and whatever their next online thing is with like the Tetris or the Mario experience that they tried already. I don't know, man. I feel like again, it's all about like with Nintendo, you got to try and figure out where their focus is because if they're not focused on a thing, they drop it. They drop it like it's hot, and that sometimes is to the chagrin of many people in their audience, and not necessarily their fans, but in their money, but in their like when moms and dads are out there trying to figure out what to buy their kids, if they find out that there's not like a single player experience in this game, they're not going to spend $60 on it when their kid asks for it for Christmas, and that's going to bite Nintendo in the ass,
Right.
right? Like the and it's not that they should like cater to everybody's whim, but they're catering to nobody's whim right now with both of these experiences that we've talked about.
They kind of go hand in hand, these two experiences. And I think the craziest thing is, like, if they did it, right? If they launched the more expensive stuff to make sure that the Mario Party Superstars experience is just perfect, spot on, no issues, I'd understand that, but then don't talk about how you'll get to play these N64 games multiplayer online and not also deliver there.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yep.
because that's what people were like, oh my god, I get to play Mario Kart Battle Arena with those same friends that we used to sit in the basement and play Mario Party. We can do that with Mario Kart. And then when it doesn't work, right, like that's what people are going to know. People don't complain when things work perfectly. They complain when there's a problem.
I mean, tinfoil hat. Like, do you think Mario Party was supposed to be one of the things that they put on the emulator, realized it was shit, and decided to throw it on a disc and charge an extra $60, right? Like, it becomes that kind of conversation
I mean,
because they didn't do anything else to it, right? Like, they didn't add a story mode or anything like that, you know?
I mean,
Um,
it's. Oh, I was reminded the saddest part about Mario Party Superstars when we played it on Friday night is I was reminded why I didn't buy Mario Party for my N64. Because I had rented it and I'm like, there's just no substance here. Like, it's just playing this game.
mhm.
And that's fun. That's fine, right? Like, you get to play against people. And there was a semblance of story mode where you'd play through the boards against people, right?
Right,
And you could
right,
build up, like, CPU sort of rivalries with the people you are fighting against.
right.
But then I'm just like, but this isn't fun unless I'm playing with other people. And I didn't get a second controller for my N64 until I'd had it for 3 years.
Yeah.
And that second controller was to fix and replace my broken controller. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't for multiplayer. When we
Yeah.
did multiplayer, the kids who came over brought their own controllers.
Right, right.
So I don't know. I mean, there's a reason why, like that night that we were supposed to play N64 all night, we ended up putting in Link to the Past and just helping our friend Evan finally find all of the items. Like I don't know. It's weird for me. I don't know. Nintendo's gonna Nintendo is what is the best and only way to put it. Which brings me to maybe happier news, right? Because another game released last week that I am so in love with right now. I'm not even sad that I wasn't able to complete it before we taped this episode. That's what I'm going to say. I'm excited that there's more to experience. And that is the Square Enix Guardians of the Galaxy game.
Yeah, man. I've heard you gushing about it for a bit.
It's amazing. It is. The worst part about the Guardians of the Galaxy game is that little voice in the back of my head that keeps saying, this is what Avengers could have been, Dev. Right? This is what it could have been, right? Look how good this game is. This could have been Avengers.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody who loves Avengers and enjoys what Avengers does. And I dig that because I have both of them, I got little trinkets and rewards in Avengers that were Guardians of the Galaxy themed. Nothing
Nice.
big or bad. I don't get to dress up like Star-Lord as Captain America, but I got like little nameplates to show
Nice.
people, yeah, I play Avengers, but I also got the good game, right? Because
yeah, glorious.
it's the story is deep. You only control Star-Lord up to this point. I just got to the 10th chapter, and already like you get to fly the Milano and actually take place in dogfights in space, which is not something I thought was going to be part of the game.
I hope it's fun because fuck me, the last time I had to do dogfighting in a game was Far Cry 5, and anybody remembers my time with that, I almost put my fist through the TV.
I have had an amazing time with it. I mean, granted, the soundtrack for this game is pure Decker music stylings.
Nice.
Like, I'm like, this soundtrack is Devon Decker, and Dale put her hand down and said, this soundtrack is Decker. You don't get to own this one. These are the songs we all love. And it's true. And really, as somebody who does an Adam Sandler podcast on the side, the fact that I'll Tumble For You by Culture Club is one of the random 80s songs that's on the soundtrack is fantastic. And even better, they've added a thing. So you have all the Guardians there, right? All the Guardians are present, but you only control Star-Lord. And then you hold the L1 button and you can tell the other 4 members of the team what you want them to do and who you want them to do it to, which is cool. It feels very what I imagine like the Final Fantasy games feel like. Like it's kind of what I imagine Final Fantasy VII sort of felt like in terms of telling the other people what to do. 'Cause I only ever played the demo, and in that game you controlled Barrett and you controlled Cloud separately. You didn't really get to control both of them at the same time. It was weird.
No, it's a control method that's been around for a while in like Locke's Quest does it and stuff like that too. Like I forget the exact. It's like real time strategy. It is in that genre of the one person is the character you control. But I mean Dynasty Warriors focuses very heavily on that method as well. But it's not a new form of strategy gaming by any stretch. Yeah.
But where I like it is that it's that type of gaming, but in sort of the like God of War, Devil May Cry, Bayonetta thing, where like you're not telling Groot to go off and do something far away. You're all contained in the little arena, and like you have to synergize with your AI friends in order to get the highest hit combo. They call it a momentum bar, and then as the more you fight, the higher your momentum bar goes, and that's just points you get after the fight. It determines how much experience you get to level up your characters. So like it's just so cool. But then they have the huddle up moments where all the Guardians come and they're like looking at you, as like first person Star-Lord to kind of inspire them to get through the fight that you're going through. And if you succeed in that, because it's a pass fail sort of option where you have to listen to what they're saying and come up with the inspirational Tom Landry speech that will inspire them to go out and fight. And either you succeed or you fail. And if you succeed, you have unlimited usage of like their power-ups for a limited amount of time. And if you fail, you have unlimited usage of your power-ups for whatever time. Like it's an interesting, like even if you do it and you fail, it's not a huge punishment for it. So like,
if the fight's not unwinnable, like,
right, it's
yeah,
cool.
that's awesome.
But the best part about it is after I haven't failed one yet, so I don't know if this happens the other way. But after the huddle, it kicks in with one of the songs, so you get to do like the Mr. Blue Sky opening from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, where you're fighting and there's this great music over it, and never gonna give you up as I'm trying to like pirate skiffs and fly out of a exploding space station was just awesome.
Yeah, that's fucking rad. But
Yeah.
the James Gunn veneer over the Guardians, I think he's kind of defined that group for the next couple of decades. Much like
Yes,
like Burton on Batman, I was
Yeah.
about to say.
but the inherent feeling of the Guardians from the comics still shines through. It feels like that weird veneer of James Gunn, but these people clearly love these characters. Not in the way like we're the Avengers, all of them feel like sort of the Walmart brand of the MCU characters.
Right, yeah.
Right? And everybody's kind of got that snark to them and all that. They act like the Guardians would act. And Drax isn't as, I'm going to say dumb, but oblivious is probably the better term, as he is in the James Gunn movies. Like
there's like a line in Avengers of snarky on one side and horny on the other, and everybody in that game exists somewhere on that scale. And if you're Tony Stark, you're like right in the middle, right?
Yeah.
but then everybody else is kind of around him on that scale. Yeah, for sure.
Where like
I know exactly what you mean.
They actually feel like the characters, and they feel like the characters as I've read them, not just as I've seen them on this big screen. And Dale, as somebody who's only ever really experienced these characters on the big screen, she's really enjoying it too. But the deep cut characters that I have run into, Gla Ree,
Cosmo show up?
What? Cosmo shows up and it's fantastic. Yeah. And awesome. He's so Cosmo that it's but like really when Gla Ree showed up, and like he originally just showed up as a criminal file while I was like going through a NovaCore computer, and I'm like, Captain Glory, that's a deep cut, really great like comic reference. And then he shows up in the story as somebody that you need to defeat because he wants to collect the bounty that's on your head. I don't think that's real. I mean, that's pretty much what the Guardians are, right? It is. I'm just like, oh my god, fucking Gla Ree, what the hell? Like, am I gonna see Quasar? Because there was also like Quasar also showed up, and Darkhawk's Order of the Raptor gem has shown up like 2 times, and I'm like, is Darkhawk gonna end up being in this game? Like, the fact that Captain Glory, of all the fucking characters that they've alluded to, has shown up makes me feel that like anybody who had an actual photo when I was digging through the NovaCore computer system has a chance of showing up in this game.
I mean, they had to make an image file for that character for that image. I mean, and nowadays that generally means that once they've made a body, they can do whatever they want with it.
Exactly. Like, and there are some where it's like photo not available, but Quasar, I'm like, oh my god, if Quasar's in this game in any form, I'm going to be blown away. I'm so excited. And they did the thing that Avengers probably would have done if Avengers was not made into a live service, which is all of the outfits are right in the game from the beginning. You just need to find them. You don't, it's not pay to own them. And all of the Guardians have the 2014 movie skins. Nice. So you can make them look like they look in the movie.
Excellent. Yeah, see, that's good. That's good fun. That's candy for the person that bought the movie, right? Like that's awesome.
That's how you do it. And it's clearly not a tie-in, it's telling its own story. But if you're somebody who likes these characters because of those movies, here's just more of the same for you to enjoy.
Cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, 2 thumbs up. Hopefully I can finish it before next episode and give like a full thing. But let me tell you this. I recently also bought a 64-ounce water jug, right? Because your boy's like real into hydration right now. I dehydrated myself playing this game with
What?
just all of the emotion that it ripped from me. So many tears, so many ruined shirts from salt water dripping from my ducks. I don't know what to say, man. Probably shouldn't have said any of that. Let's just be honest.
No, I'm excited. I'm glad that there's a good experience for you here towards the end of the year as we kind of start to fade away from 2021. I don't know. I don't know what Christmas is supposed to be this year. Last year there was the promise of new systems and all that, right? And now this year it's just kind of like
This year it's still kind of the promise of new systems because nobody could get their hands on them.
yeah, you're not wrong. I don't know, man. We will see.
Yes, and that is, I think that's where we do it. Is there anything else that you want to add into this 250th episode of the Say Report?
No, man. It's been a good 250. I cannot wait for 250 more. And we've got a whole other show we do. We've got extra episodes of this show we do. There's all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, this is our 287th overall. If you count everything that we've done, including the very special episodes, just under the Say Report banner. And then if you add in the 11 episodes of the Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe that we've done, we're at 298, baby.
Yeah, man. But it's been good, and thank you to anybody that's been here for the ride. Whenever you got on, like it's awesome to have you here.
Yeah, we appreciate you. We appreciate you listening with your kids. Hi, if you're listening, 3-year-olds. You probably shouldn't be, but thank you. It means a lot. So I mean, shout out to Hab Guy. That was a very heartwarming story. So thank you for sharing that with me, Hab.
What did you guys watch for Halloween? And it better not have been Curious George, because apparently that is too scary.
Too scary. I mean, it's too scary for a 5-year-old. I don't know what it would do to a 3-year-old. Yes. So there is that. So if you would like to contribute to our rivalry with Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, find me on Twitter at Devon D. Decker and hit me with that hashtag Say Report Says So.
And do everything you can to make sure that you say that Ad Siege versus the World is not involved.
I like this one. I think that this is the direction, right? It's not that we're going negative. It's more that we're driving a wedge between the two of us, right? We're leading into the third act of a romantic comedy with the 250th episode of the Say Report. Soon there will be the separation. You know what I did, right? Last thing, and I should have brought it up earlier. I rewatched Tenacious D in the Pick of Destiny.
Oh, man.
That movie is 15 years old.
I just on a whim, I put that on the other day because we were looking for something Halloween-y but not Halloween-y, and I was like, this has some weird stuff in it. Let's do this one.
The Devil, right? And Ben Stiller. The Devil and Ben Stiller. Yeah, it's awesome.
I read that book.
It's pretty good. Check it out. It left Netflix yesterday, the 31st of October. So it's probably going somewhere else. If I had to venture a guess, I'd say Paramount Plus, because it seems like that's where everything is going. But
I bet you it might be an HBO pickup. I could definitely see it being an HBO pickup.
Well, considering they have the show, right?
Yeah.
Watch the Tenacious D show on HBO Max, right? As a final not an ad shout out for HBO Max. If you can't find Pick of Destiny, watch that show, because it's also pretty awesome. But that's another discussion for another time. I'm sorry for attacking Moron. And Will, please, say the Say Report says so. Have a good night, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the 250 more.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.